pretty long, oh, there we go. Okay. So there's a pretty long list of what counts as qualifying crimes in order for someone to qualify for a U visa. Not all those crimes would overlap with what our mandate is under the Boston Human Rights Commission. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I get into the conversation that I had with the Chicago and the New York City Boston Human Rights Commissions, who have actually undertaken becoming certifying agencies. But so the list, although it's pretty long, it ranges from human trafficking to kidnapping to manslaughter, et cetera. It's a long list, but not all of those would be under our. First of all, they would just not align with our mandate, and a lot of those would be handled by some of the other certifying agencies, like law enforcement, for example, or the Attorney General's office, or entities like that. And so, but there is a list of qualifying crimes, and then there's also a sort of definition around what counts as trafficking for T visa purposes as well. So the idea would be that the primary purpose of the certification is to confirm, like I said before, whether the victim was helpful in trying to detect, investigate, or prosecute the crime. But ultimately, it's USCIS, which is the Immigration Services. They're the ones that are in charge of ultimately deciding whether it does qualify, whether it does fit within the definition of a qualifying crime for the purposes of giving a U or T visa. So we would not be in charge of deciding whether someone actually gets the U or T visa. We would potentially sign off on a certification form. Then they're responsible for sending it as part of their application. And then USCIS can very well look at that and say, unfortunately, we don't think it qualifies, even though it was signed by an agency. So we have, we could play a role, but ultimately we're not the ultimate decision makers on what happens with that. And so some of the recommendations I was thinking is that the commission could consider holding itself out as an entity that, under the right circumstances, under the certain types of qualifying crimes, that we would be helpful in certifying U and T visa applications, certifications from individuals who have specifically already reached out to the Human Rights Commission to file a complaint of discrimination, for example, with the commission. And so it would not be our role, for example, to identify who could qualify for a U or T visa certification. It would be up to the applicant or the person who is submitting a discrimination claim with the commission to also say, in addition to the discrimination claim, I also want to get a certification, and then we would review that at that point. Sorry, I got a notification on my computer. Okay, here we go. So to demonstrate eligibility for the U or T visa, the commission could require that the complainant show that they have a potentially viable claim of discrimination and lay out some of the facts of that, and show that they were a victim. And by certifying that request, we would acknowledge that they were cooperating with the commission in investigating what that, for example, discrimination was that happened to them. If we take a look at that and they're supporting, and then we could sign off on the certification. I'm simplifying it, right? It would take a little bit more of obviously assessing what that complaint is and having some sort of understanding of, like, okay, would this fit under our mandate? Would this fit under the qualifying crime? But ultimately, if we do think so, signing off on that. And so the potential next steps, if this were something that we wanted to continue exploring, looking into, and taking on it as a commission, at least some of the recommendations I thought of were, in order to better understand the feasibility of these recommendations and to create practices around it, we should be consulting with the human rights commissions that currently exist around the other cities that have already tried to do this, to see what have been some of the obstacles they've run into, what have been some of the best practices, how is it going, has it been helpful, So that's one piece. And like I said, I did meet with two of those, one in Chicago and one from New York City. And so shortly I'll give a little summary of what I heard from those spaces that could apply to, you know, us determining whether we want to do that. So that's one recommendation. Another was consulting with local immigration attorneys about the certification process and the new state law that I mentioned earlier to see if there's any just concerns or ideas around, you know, how this could be potentially helpful for the clients that they work with. Another was uh, consulting or submitting some sort of letter request to USCIS, again, the US Customs and Immigration Services, to ultimately they have to accept whether we're a qualified certifying agency or not. And so what the other commissions in Chicago and New York did was send a letter to USCIS to say, hey, we are putting ourselves out there as a certifying agency, and just to kind of give USCIS a heads up so that if they ever were to receive a certification signed by the Human Rights Commission, they're not, you know, issuing a blanket denial because they've never received anything from us. And so potentially consulting with them or sending them some sort of communication is another next step. Developing a procedure for how we would evaluate those requests, who would be looking at them, who would be making that determination, would be really important, you know, and deciding whether there's the capacity to do that. You know, so that's another, you know, potential next step. Conducting outreach to advocates and community organizations who are working on behalf of immigrant communities, also to receive feedback. And then the final one was reviewing the ordinance, the Human Rights Commission ordinance, just to assure, you know, compliance with like the mandate and all of that. So those were the background and potential next steps. And then the last thing I'll do is just report on the conversations with Chicago and New York, so you get a sense of what other cities have done. So New York was the first city human rights commission to do this and take this on. And so I spoke to one of their staff from their office, and they they have a little bit of a different mandate than necessarily the Boston one, because some of these other commissions have both an arm around investigation and mediation and things like that, but some of them also have an enforcement arm as well. And so, you know, that's not necessarily what the Boston Human Rights Commission has. We don't have the enforcement side. We have more of the investigation, the mediation side under our mandate. And so we spoke a little bit about that, but I personally don't think from these conversations and from research that would necessarily be an obstacle, because these commissions, first of all, the language in the law says that it could be an agency that either does prosecution or investigation. And so, I think just in the law, how it's written creates an opening for even, for example, like MCAT and others, right, to do just more of the investigation piece of things. We don't have to necessarily ever prosecute something or look to prosecute anything. So we talked a little bit about that with the commissions, with the two commissions that I mentioned. Another thing that came up was that they haven't, even though they're big cities, right, New York and Chicago, it's not like they've had an overwhelming amount of folks submit certification requests to their offices. And I think a large part of that, some of it could be because maybe just the word hasn't gotten out there to enough people. That's certainly part of it. But I think a larger part of why they haven't been overwhelmed with requests has been because ultimately, because of the mandates of the human rights commissions, the types of qualifying crimes that overlap with what we would be investigating as like types of discrimination and things like that, it's more narrow. And so most people who are seeking UNT visa certifications wouldn't be coming to the Boston Human Rights Commission to do that. They would be going to law enforcement or some of the other agencies I mentioned. And so that would capture most individuals, but this could potentially be one additional resource for some folks who either have had, for example, not helpful interactions with law enforcement and they feel more comfortable approaching a human rights commission, or because they're not looking necessarily to prosecute, they just want some sort of support, or because it just fits more neatly within the mandate of the commission versus going to police. And so there is an opportunity to do that. And so let me pause there just to kind of start maybe hearing some thoughts and questions, and I think maybe as we do that, it'll spark my memory of a couple of the other things that came up in the conversation, and I'm going to take a look at my notes as well while we do that.
Commissioner Russo.
Thank you so much for all the work you did around this. Sort of back to our other questions, data, is there a way to know what the need is in Boston for this?
I mean, there's probably two routes. One is more like anecdotally, right? Speaking with immigration attorneys, and then there's more formally, like if we were to actually put out some sort of a data collection survey or something like that. So that's possible to do. It's very well possible to connect with for example, there's a statewide immigration legal services coalition that is a coalition of the legal services, like nonprofit providers who do immigration representation. And so within that coalition, there's a specific working group that works specifically on just UNT visa issues. So that's an avenue where either a more formal survey or data collection tool can be used, or just more informally, reaching out for, asking what is the need, or inviting folks to a meeting potentially, to speak on that. And so, yeah, I've in my, work communicated with some of those attorneys, and similar to what I heard from speaking to the New York and the Chicago offices, is that it's not that there's this overwhelming need for the Boston Human Rights Commission, because it wouldn't be a large caseload, but that it would still be helpful to have yet another tool, because sometimes people do run into issues of getting certifications. I'll give an example, which maybe wouldn't apply to what the mandate would be for the Human Rights Commission, but just an example of an issue that comes up. Often we hear of situations in which an immigrant who went through some sort of harm tries to go to an agency and try to receive a certification, and they're unresponsive. For example, recently that happened in Plymouth County Correctional Facility, where they had not created a policy under this new state law. And so an immigrant there, tried to seek a certification, and it was blanketly denied without any sort of statement, without any sort of process. And so, they were kind of left with very little options outside of that. I'm not saying that in that particular case or situation, that person could have then come to the Boston Human Rights Commission. I don't know the facts of that situation, but there are definitely potentially cases in which if they're having issues getting a certification from another agency, or it just doesn't fit within those mandates, that they could come. But yeah, I don't know the numbers. It's a good question. We could try to get some information, either anecdotally or more formally if needed. Yeah.
Commissioner Evans.
Yeah, I have a few questions, but I'll try to just get out the most important one or ones. I wondered, you talked a lot about first of all, thank you for your work on this. It sounds like you did a lot of really good research and taught me a lot today. I wonder, you talked a lot about the advantages. Did you come across the reason why Human Rights Commission wouldn't do this? Just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, speaking to the other commissions, I can't say that they directly said, you know, we regret having done this. You know, they still found it helpful, but I think it's a question of, for example, capacity. I think is a question, and that's why I did want to address the fact that there hasn't been an overwhelming amount of certification requests, even in these larger cities like New York and Chicago. But at the same time, you know, I think it's still something we want to think about because who, for example, who from the staff at, you know, that's part of the Human Rights Commission would potentially be receiving these applications and reviewing them, and would they need, for example, any sort of training on some of that? My assumption is that there would need to be at least some. It doesn't necessarily have to be an attorney. You know, these, I could tell you at least the Chicago Human Rights Commission, they don't have an immigration attorney receiving these, you know, certification requests and processing them. It's just a staff member within their office. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a legal professional, an attorney doing that, because again, we wouldn't be the ones making the ultimate determination. There would be basically some criteria within whatever policy we create to say, like, okay, if you receive a certification request, step one is going to be to, you know, just review it. Step two is going to be, okay, what was the, you know, crime? Does it fit within this list of qualifying crimes that we as a commission can even look at, you know? So, you know, we'd have to develop some sort of process to make it easier for somebody to be reviewing those requests. So I would say capacity was the first thing that came up for me, just in thinking that, you know, it's a small staff in the Boston Human Rights Commission. This would be something new because Massachusetts also has that law around creating a policy that would have to happen as well. Whereas, for example, I don't necessarily think that Chicago and New York have the same type of law, which is really helpful in Massachusetts because, you know, now we know that there's policies and agencies have to be following them, but obviously that would be some work on our end to develop that, right? So yeah, that's the things that come to mind.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Valentine, do you have any questions, comments?
None at this time. Just I think thank you for all of the research that you've done to this. And it's something that I, you know, as an immigrant myself, would definitely be in support of us pursuing.
Commissioner Evans?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Just one really quick other one. You'd mentioned ultimately it's up to USCIS to determine whether or not it gets certified. And I wonder, I mean, maybe this is an obvious answer, but is there a concern about bias? Like how do they make those determinations, especially after someone would have already theoretically aided in an investigation that maybe put them at risk? I don't know. Is that a concern, bias?
Like a concern that there is bias within USCIS that they're going to want to deny these, you're saying, or
yeah, I mean, I guess is there information about how often denials happen, or like is that a concern? Because at least if I were applying for this, I want to know what the chances were of getting certified.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. It reminds me of something I forgot to mention, which is that, and I'm going to say at least New York, because I can't recall if this is what they also do in Chicago, but I could say in New York, what they require is that if somebody is coming forward to the commission to request a visa certification, they actually require that they come, and sometimes they help them connect with an attorney or legal services organization that would help them submit the request, so that, because that attorney, that immigration attorney in this case, would have a better sense of saying to the client, actually, you know, this is likely to be denied. You don't really have a claim here. And so what happens is that it's already like filtered through an immigration attorney or legal services organization to say, we actually already took a look at this. Here's kind of the facts. This is why we think it's a qualifying crime. And it gives less work to the commission to have to start from zero. And so by the time it works its way from an attorney to the commission to USCIS, there's been some sort of like vetting around that. So yeah, I don't know the numbers of. Oh, I think one thing that actually there are no numbers as to like knowing how many people have gotten denied, because ultimately one problem that I think both commissions stated was that there's really no way of knowing. USCIS is not going to reach back out to the commission and say, we processed and gave a U visa to this person, you know? So after it leaves the commission, it's kind of like, we don't know what happened, you know, unless we have some sort of mechanism with the person who submitted it or with the legal services organizations to say like, hey, can you keep us posted, or, have some sort of process there. But that's not what the two commissions that I spoke to do. They kind of just leave it up to the attorneys at that point and the clients. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, the point about vetting, and yeah, that all makes sense. Thank you.
Commissioner Russo?
Well, I certainly support this idea. I was wondering if you had any discussions with Mira and if they've had experience with this, and if we were to go this route, would we, do you think that my concern is capacity and also qualifications for reviewing these? If perchance there would be any immigration lawyers that could do some, pro bono work with the Human Rights Commission to help us, get better qualified to review these applications.
Yeah, so Mira is, for those who don't know, it's a coalition that includes various immigrant rights organizations as well, and they themselves don't do legal representation. So they do have some attorneys on staff, but they're not a legal services representation organization. But there are several out there, like Greater Boston Legal Services, Northeast Justice, the Justice Center in Brockton. Like there's several out there. And so no, I haven't specifically discussed it with them. But I have had discussions with some of the attorneys who do UNT visa representation work. So yeah, we're all within the umbrella of doing immigration related work, but yeah, I haven't spoke directly with Mira because they're not really processing these sort of certifications. But yeah, I think that's a good idea of looking into a potential partnership if that was possible, having somebody either on a pro bono basis, like you said, or to help train a staff member within the Human Rights Commission around this. So I think it's something, if we were to kind of take the next steps, definitely worth considering.
Okay, I'm going to give myself permission to speak now. First, thank you very much for this presentation. It's an excellent presentation. Like my colleagues, I am in complete favor of moving in that direction. I also think that given the previous conversation we had, this is an area that we can decide that is an area of a special interest for the Commission, and therefore we could start forming partnerships in that direction. Now talking about this multi-pronged approach that Commissioner Valentine mentioned before, that it doesn't have to be all data and it doesn't have to be all hate, but that if we are moving in this direction, we could establish formal or informal partnerships with organizations such as Mira and others that are local and that work on immigration matters. So we could start that immediately because we already approve partnerships. Now, my question more concrete, specifically, is there something that you think we could do tonight, Commissioner Paredes, to start the process, to start the ball rolling? Or would you like more time? Or do you think you want
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think deciding at the very least, I would say, if there's enough interest to say, let's follow with some other the next steps, which some of those next ones without getting too concrete into saying like, yes, we've said yes, let's start writing the policy for this, is for example, checking in with a couple more of like the immigration attorneys who do
Let me
UNTV.
let me interrupt you, because since you're gonna about to do it, let's just do it. Could you formally put forward a motion, language for a motion, with those initial steps that you think would be propelling us in the right direction?
Yeah, I would put forward a motion for the next step for determining whether we want to become a certification agency would be to have follow-up conversations with local immigration practitioners, whether that be through conversations or whether that be through some sort of formal or informal data collection about this process, what their feedback is on whether how helpful this would be, and any other feedback related to if the commission were to take this on, what would be some of the best practices. So yeah, my motion would be to have those conversations.
To start those conversations about whether this would be
helpful and viable for the Boston Human Rights
for the Human Rights Commission. Do you have any particular organization in mind or organizations in mind that you think that we could approach?
I am thinking reaching out to the UNT Visa Legal Services Working Group that has a number of different organizations that are part of this large umbrella that I mentioned, the Statewide Immigration Coalition. So reaching out to them to solicit feedback.
That sounds perfect for the motion. One more part. Would you like to invite this organization to present, or would you prefer that there is an informal meeting between, for instance, the executive director and you and representatives of that organization?
I would say initially just putting out a call for feedback,
Okay.
and as part of that call, asking if it would be helpful for folks to participate in some sort of public forum or discussion.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So there is a motion on the table to reach out to these organizations for feedback on the issue, to see if this approach, pursuing this approach, would be helpful and viable for the Boston Human Rights Commission. Is there any second?
I'll second that, and I think we should just add into the motion, the purpose would be for the Human Rights Commission to be a EU visa sponsorship agency.
Is there any discussion, further discussion for the motion? Okay, hearing none, let's vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. The motion carries unanimously.
Great. So yes, I'll take those next step and circle back and report back.
Thank you very much.
Next coming sessions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And let's move to the last part of our meeting, which is determining the format of the remaining 2023 public meetings. We've been meeting for 2 years online at 5 o'clock, mostly on Thursdays, but things have changed, and it is time to discuss whether we are going to move into face-to-face meetings. I'm going to leave this discussion open to you, please. Anybody? Commissioner Russo, you brought this up several times, so if you would like to start the discussion.
Yes, I would love for us to meet in person. I think meetings in person are valuable for us to develop relationships with each other, and lead to better discussions. I also would like us to consider changing the meeting time from 5 o'clock. I think in order to have, this is a public meeting, to be able to have the public participate, I think 5 o'clock is a very hard time for the public to do so.
Is there any, I'm in agreement completely with Commissioner Russo. I think we should meet in person. I think we also should visit communities, not meet always in a closed room at City Hall, but also schedule some meetings, several meetings every year in the communities, in different communities. And obviously it would require a special coordination, a change of schedule for all of us, but we can schedule things easy, I think, by using an app to figure out people's schedule. So the rest, what would you think?
I'm definitely for meeting in person and shifting to a time that's a little bit more accessible.
Mhm.
Makes me wonder, since it is kind of a shift back to normal, for lack of a better term, I wonder how we can use it as an opportunity to promote the meetings. Maybe leverage it as an opportunity to build momentum. I'm all for being in the community, and perhaps through some of the relationships that we're developing, that's a way to drum up some interest, because it sounds like people want to know about us, but yeah, we just have to put some effort into getting the word out.
And a question, I might have, sorry, missed this. In doing it in person, would it also be recorded or online, or is the option still going to be?
It could be, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay, the reason I
Yeah.
say it, because I think there's ups and downs to both, like doing all in person and all online, because in person, especially if we're doing like in communities, then I think it's easier and more realistic to say that people who have multiple jobs, for example, who have multiple jobs, kids, etc., are they going to be able to make it in person and travel to do that, right? For some people, Zoom has, online has been more helpful. And then for others, it's been the reverse, where being in person is more helpful because they may not have easy access to Wi-Fi, internet, et cetera. And so I think we may want to consider either doing a mix or doing both, or figure something out to make it accessible to both sides,
Commissioner Valentine?
I agree with a hybrid. I think to just be accessible to as many people as possible. I can see where maybe we do sort of like, it's either we are in person quarterly or we're online quarterly or something like that, but definitely doing some sort of a mix.
I completely agree. I think how can we do this? It would be difficult to start a conversation comparing schedules here, but maybe the executive director and I can send you an email, ask about your availability in the next, let's say, few months until December, and come out with a possible hybrid schedule, meaning probably mostly in person with some online. There needs to be a little bit of predictability too, for the public to understand that we are here. So if we appear and reappear, that might not be the best. But if you trust that Commissioner Helmy and I can come out with some formulas and then pass them around, we could probably then why don't we just move to have the next meeting in person? In the meantime, we could then figure out what time and what place, and what's the schedule for the following meetings. Does that sound okay?
Sounds
So
great.
yeah, so we'll move to that. Let's vote on that. But so the next meeting would be in person. I don't know where, but it would be in person, and the schedule of meetings will be prepared in the next few weeks with your input and the input of the City Hall as well. Okay, so let's decide on, are you okay with voting on having the next meeting in person? Everybody in favor, raise your hand. And it is unanimously approved. And so from now until the next meeting, you will be receiving some surveys about time, schedules, et cetera, so we can figure out the next steps. Thank you, Commissioner Russo, for bringing this up. Very important. And it is now time for public comments. Is there any? There are two people. One of them is Talia Viveros Weara, our intern. Are there any comments or questions from the public, including Talia? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
No. Second,
Okay, so thank you very much. Everybody in favor of closing the meeting, please raise your hand. The meeting is adjourned at 6:35. Thank you very much. Very full meeting, very good meeting, very action-oriented meeting. I think we are in business. Thank you so much. Take care.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
bye-bye.